So I want us to take a couple of moments here and just look at the reformer, theologian, pastor, John Calvin, and his influence in the educational sphere. A lot of people think of him just as a minister, just as someone who had a lot of influence inside the church during his time, bringing about the Reformation. But his influence went far beyond the church, went far beyond theology, went far beyond anything sacred. And John Calvin has a very deep influence in our educational sphere that we have today. One of the things that John Calvin believed was this idea known as the divine accommodation. What that means is that John Calvin believed that sin had so damaged the person, had so affected or ruined an individual that it did more than just separate them from God. It affected their mind. It affected their ability to learn, their ability to take in knowledge. And so because of that, God, knowing how each individual is affected by sin differently, had to reveal himself to each individual in different ways. And so God had chosen to different avenues of which to reveal himself. And why is this important? How is this educational idea influential upon us today? Well, we can take that same biblical model of divine accommodation and we move into the classroom. And for example, a teacher or an educator must determine what a student knows before teaching a lesson that expands their knowledge. The teacher has to know exactly how much knowledge the child already has if they're going to seek to expand that child's knowledge. And so metaphorically, the teacher incarnates the lesson being taught by accommodating it to the student's understanding, kind of enabling development in that child. And so John Calvin's divine accommodation was used in the educational field, as John Calvin was very big in education. John Calvin believed that all the ministers needed to be highly educated. And so he began instituting after he left in exile, and he came back to Geneva during the Reformation time, and he came back to Geneva with the purpose of beginning schools. And in Geneva, he started a primary school, he started a secondary school, he started a school of higher learning, and all of these were for the purpose of training up and educating ministers, but not just ministers. He wanted to educate people for civil government. John Calvin believed that people need to be taught Christian values, Christian ideas, and also be highly educated for the purpose of going to civil government for the contributing to society and contributing to civil government. And so John Calvin had this idea that educators or ministers need to be highly educated, that all individuals need to be highly educated for the purpose of being involved in the civil government. And so this led to, like I said, he led to him creating the schools, joining with others and creating the schools. And in these schools, John Calvin's works, the Institutes of Christian Religion, were used as the primary textbooks for educating ministers. Now, the Institutes of Christian Religion continue today to be one of the most influential works among ministers. People continue to use it, although a lot of people may disagree with some of the conclusions that John Calvin come to, some of the theological aspects of John Calvin. John Calvin's work in the Institutes of the Christian Religion are still widely used today by many ministers across denominations because of how theologically rich and how theologically sound they are. Not only that, John Calvin's influence on the education of children for leadership. He desired children to be educated for the purpose of ministry, for the purpose of civil government, so that when these children would get into civil government after having been educated in his schools, they would be bringing with them the Christian values, not just in a church setting, but in a civil government, so they can begin helping the civil government with the values that were instilled to them from the biblical principles and biblical values. John Calvin also believed highly in parental education of children. He believed that education started in the home, and so parents need to be deeply involved in the children's education. And we see that as continuing to be very important today. Parents need to be very involved in the education of children, as we see not only in the classroom but at home, helping their children learn. But as we see this dichotomy, this separation of secular and sacred in our school systems, is very important that parents are involved in their children's education, so they make sure the values that they want their children to be learning, they are learning those values at school, and those values that they don't want them to learn, when they come home, they are influential in teaching the children the difference in the values that they believe come from God and come from their Christian religion, and that which does not. And so they need to be involved in that so that others are not as influential on their children as they are. And so those were kind of some of the influences that John Calvin had on education. Now, what kind of critiques can we give John Calvin? I believe one of John Calvin's biggest critiques on him as a person, and even it went on into his educational field, is John Calvin was very stubborn. John Calvin was very, when you disagreed with him, he did not take it lightly. And so when it came to developing the schools, primary schools, secondary schools, the School of Higher Education there in Geneva, John Calvin went through several people that he was working with because they just clashed and they did not buy into his ideas. So he would go and find somebody else that would, and they would begin helping him. Also, when it came to the Institutes of the Christian Religion, that was the primary textbook that he himself wrote. And he did not allow a whole lot for different ideas being taught in his school system. And so those would be some of the things that I think we can critique him on. I believe we need to have a little bit more diversity for the purpose of allowing students kind of the Spirit of God to kind of lead them in knowledge. But I think the greatest knowledge comes not only from knowing what you believe, but knowing what others believe, and using that for the purpose of furthering your ability to defend those things.